The Waking Tree by C. Don McCallum's Chapter 2 Eyes. The gray-green paneling of the living room breathed out the past like a contagious disease and creaked under the 30 years of pressure from the roof and the decaying contents of the hot, stifling attic. Trinkets and memorabilia from Jared's youth lay sleeping and hidden in cardboard boxes up there, as did his mother's belongings, his father's, his brother Christopher's, too. Some of the forgotten items found resting places long before the small town extended its strangling reach to their little part of the country where Jared's family had lived for so many years. I cannot forget. Jared's father had built this house himself, with the help of a few friends who staggered in from time to time. But his father would not be around to see even a single coat of paint peel and strip itself from the pale trim under the pressures of time, rain, wind, and the oppressive Texas sun. His mother, Bernadine, had been the one to make all of those years of repairs, upkeep on the house, and on the little family that dwelled within it. But Bernadine never gave up hope that he would come back from wherever it was he went. She kept up the house, the yard. When he finally came back, she wanted everything to be just like it was before. She took pictures so he wouldn't miss a thing. Pictures of the boys, of the house he built, of her, of them in the woods that he had kept cleared around the house. Everything he missed. Almost 20 years later, when Bernadine died and Jared brought his family to live in the house, a camera still sat in the shoebox with an almost full roll inside. The closet was full of the celluloid memories stacked away, labeled in photo albums and random boxes she had been saving for her husband to see when he came back home. There was a picture of the dogwood they had planted together in the front yard, standing at various heights and widths, blooming white and then barren. Sometimes one of their boys would be in front of it or on a low limb. There was a picture of the road in front of the house when it was paved just a few years ago. Jared thought it was 10 years ago. My rings say it was 15. She took a picture of the toilet when it overflowed and sat unattended until the plumber came. She even got a few shots of me, her boys, collecting my day glow fruits. There was a picture of Jared after they realized Christopher was missing for good and never coming back, and the neighbor man down the road, Mr. Abbott, standing by his truck on the day he drove around showing off his new ride. As Jared looked through the albums earlier, that first night they moved in, he noticed something. It seemed that every picture of him or his brother or whatever his mother had decided to frame in the camera's viewfinder for that shot was off-center. He laughed. She never did know how to take a good picture, he thought. Abra, look at this, he said when she came in that evening after it got too dark to pull any more weeds. They're all like that? She asked. Yeah. He turned page after page, album after album, revealing hundreds of off-center pictures. Jared and Abra on their graduation day from high school. Christopher holding a snake he caught under the front porch. Darnell snaggle-toothed and smiling too hard by the road. All of them were off-center. Fingering one of the peculiar voids, a barren spot in a photograph that she must have set the camera timer for, Abra stared at one picture of Bernadine standing straight and alone in the living room. It was just a few months before she died, before they knew Josephine was on her way. Abra said, "It's like she was leaving a space for somebody, for him." Jared looked at the picture. No, he thought, and flipped back through the pictures again, stuck on pages and loose in piles, only faster this time. Only now he imagined his father gazing from every blank space on every snapshot. This was not how he remembered his father before he left, but there he was in every picture, the ghost his father haunting him from the emptiness, where he would have stood had he not left them. Jared snapped the album shut, stacked it on top of the others, and closed the door. His heart was pulling at him in a way it hadn't done in years. He had to get that haunting face out of his mind, let the voice waft back to the winds and away from him for good. But he couldn't get rid of the pictures, the ones in his closet or the ones in his mind. He would wait to move them up to the attic in the morning before anyone else awoke, when it was still cool and quiet. I listened, and a particle of air said, "Once inside the house, I thought I'd hide for a while inside the grooves of a familiar drawer. There, maybe I could listen to the memories of dead trees, find the history of the winds." The drawer only spoke of blood and hatched up limbs, a disembodied voice, not unlike my own, yet mistakenly displaced somehow. I spun myself free, trying to loosen the suffering stranger, but I am too small alone. The eastern red cedar tree near me shuddered and tensed when the rock hit it, yet it held no hard feelings toward the little stone. The tree even felt a little sad when the stone fell into the lonely, dark ivy. Would it ever see the sun again? Darnell hadn't expected to hit the tree. It was a happy accident, one that he would have to try to repeat. Josephine watched from the edge of the ivy, her toe waving at the green leaves through the opening of her brown sandals. Sometimes her skin kissed the living earth. I had 4 years of rings with her in them then. "Watch out for snakes," Darnell warned, smiling over his shoulder. "There ain't any snakes in there," Josephine informed him, walking back to tarry under my limbs. She leaned up against me, placing her head on my sturdy trunk, and rolled up to see how the sky looked through my limbs and leaves. I was beginning to give fruit. She loved the sap scent and the way my bark rippled, as if it longed to reach out to touch her and whisper its secrets into her fairy girl ear. My tree girl. But most of all, she loved how my branches stretched out over her, lending myself to her and all of the living creatures that dwelled on, around, and beneath me. She knew I was a part of something ancient, life in stationary slow motion. I hummed her name. I sang to her my tree secrets. I was a protector of all things in need of protection, and she heard my eternal song of silence and life. I was her friend. I grow at the thought of her still. Josephine let her head drop to its natural position and turned to see her mother on her knees in front of a flower bed close to the house, pulling out the weeds. Abra focused on wrenching the unwanted plants from her garden, hitting their newly exposed roots together in the air above the ground, so she could return the soil to where it belonged, in the nutrient-rich piles around the stems of her flowers. Abra hadn't always thought of these flowers as hers. They were once Bernardines, planted and nurtured by her kind, lonely hands, and now they became living heirlooms, the best kind that Abra would pull up and share with her children when they had homes of their own. These growing beauties were the best evidence of Bernardine's love and decades of effort. The blue-gray artemisia mingled behind the near-white daylilies, hanging their heads over the loss of the nearby hyacinth blossoms, now brown and withered by the heat and the curse of their brief but intensely beautiful existence. Abra cheered them all up with her tender touch and her careful removal of the weeds that threatened their stability and stole what the flowers needed from the soil. She threw the refused plants on the pile by her side with the rest of the henbit, chickweed, spurge, roadside aster. "Darnell, what are you doing over there?" Abra demanded, brushing her hair away from her eyes. A smudge of soil planted itself on her cheek. The thud, the shimming whine of the trees in the ivy persisted, adding a destructive beat to the melodies of the quiet shuffling that accompanied her work. "Nothing," he told her. "Well, obviously you're doing something," Jared said, emerging from the shaded garage, wiping his hand on a dingy, tattered rag. "I was just trying to stir up some snakes. Didn't you say they hid out here?" "There ain't any snakes in there," Josephine told her brother again. Well, where do you think they live, Josephine? Darnell looked over his shoulder, rock ready in hand. Leave her alone, Darnell, Abra pleaded, frail and sweating. Josephine stood there, silent, feeling me at her back. Another rock struck another tree. It surged through the ground to the soles of her feet and up through her body. Stop it, Josephine shouted. I'm not hurting anybody. Yeah, well, you're not helping anybody either, Jared said, walking back into the garage, picking up the push broom. Why don't you come in here and make yourself useful? Ready to pitch again, Darnell lobbed the rock in his hand. What's Josephine going to do? Darnell griped, eyeing his sister with a sideways glance. There wasn't a chance he'd make himself useful if his sister didn't have to get busy, too. Josephine's too little to help, her daddy said. Josephine listened and shifted her feet. She wanted her brother to drop the rock. Darnell charged the rock into the tree and burned a look at his sister. Snakes do too live in there, he muttered on his way to get the push broom in his father's hand. Josephine, Abra said, go out back and get me a bucket to put these weeds in. At her mother's request, Josephine left my side and ran to the compost heap. As the tiny footsteps grew quieter, Jared re-emerged from the garage. We got any that iced tea left? Jared asked his wife. Abra rose and brushed off her knees. Darnell, you want some? The boy nodded, grunted, and pushed the dirt and leaves to the edge of the driveway. Abra went inside as Josephine sauntered from around the corner, swinging the orange plastic bucket. She dropped the bucket next to the pile of weeds her mother had gathered and started loading them in. Most of them were pretty, she thought. Josephine couldn't figure out how her mother knew that the yellow and white flowers, the violet flowers, the teardrop leaves, and the rest didn't belong there among the faded hyacinths and remorseful lilies. She asked about weeds one time. Her mother told her, weeds are anything that you don't want growing in your garden. Seeing her daughter's blank gaze, Abra had pulled her close, kissed her, and said, I just want the prettiest in my garden, and the sweetest smelling, too. How do you know what's pretty and what's not? Josephine wanted to ask, not understanding it, but she wanted to make her mama happy. She let that answer be enough for now. It just didn't make any sense to Josephine. She liked the way all of the flowers and plants looked and felt under her fingertips. They all smelled beautiful to her. I know, Josephine, I told her. I know. Josephine shook off some excess dirt that her mother had missed from the disemboweled roots. The coarse putty-colored particles floated up to her and lingered in the air. She liked that smell, watching the dirt settle and instantly commingle with the upturned bed of soil. Abra came from the house into the garage carrying 2 big glasses full of iced tea. The 2 men approached her with leaden steps and outstretched hands, each taking a big gulp of the sweet liquid followed by a deep breath, staring at nothing, then glancing at each other only to look away. Abra went back in for a second and came out again with a big glass for herself. She walked over to Josephine, still collecting and examining her weeds for some sign of ugliness, and offered her a sip. Josephine wiped her hands off on her dusty thighs and tasted the bitter drink, gulping its wet coolness, knowing she must save some for her mother. She's thirsty, too. Abra held a hand under the glass ready to catch it if it fell from her daughter's small, awkward hands. Josephine handed the drink back to her mother, who finished the rest in one long, meditated, and fierce swilling alternated with deep breathing that consumed the air around her. She set the glass down on a round, bumpy stepping stone full of multicolored rocks peeking out of the concrete, and sat down to help Josephine load the rest of the weeds into the bucket. Hey, Darnell, Jared said from the darkness of the filthy garage. Sir, catch. Something hit the boy in the face. Don't! The boy shirked and jumped back, hating the tickling feeling of the unknown. What is it? He asked, watching the daddy long legs crawl fast out of the garage to the grass, the comforting cover of darkness so inviting to spiders. Darnell laughed and dropped the broom. He chased after it, catching the creature before it disappeared into the lush St. Augustine. He pulled it up by one of its suspended, panicking legs. The spider's genetic memory screamed to him about little boys. No, the spider said in whispers and screams. Get away. The legs grabbed at the air, but the air offered no help. Mama, Josephine shrieked. She felt the spider's fear. What's he doing? Here, Darnell said, catching his sister's eye and possessing her full attention. You want to see? Darnell held the spider up and gave one leg a tug. He walked to Josephine with a spider dangling between his thumb and index finger in one hand, and the leg he pulled off of it in the other. Jared looked up from his work in the garage and laughed. No, Josephine cried. She heard the spider's cry and became its voice. It's no big deal. He snapped off another leg. See, Darnell glanced at his father and smiled. They just come off so easy. He pulled again. He laughed. Darnell, you put that thing down, his mother griped, her head bent toward the flower bed. She knew about boys, too. He pulled again. Josephine jumped up and clung to her mother, sobbing. Jared, tell him to put that thing down, Abra begged. She held her daughter close. Jared laughed again. Josephine, it's no big deal, honey. It's just a spider. It don't make it right, the little girl pleaded. Abra rubbed her daughter's shoulder, pulling her tight up to her body, trying to absorb her like how they used to be. Darnell pulled off another leg. The spider cried too quietly for human ears to hear. Trees twitched and shuddered, wanting to lend him their soft bark and branches for some comfort in his last moments, maybe to offer up some sap for a healing, connective salve. They lose legs all the time just from walking around. Darnell tried to explain. Look how easy they come off. He put his forefinger and thumb on another leg. Here, you want to try, he extended the spider in his hand to his little sister, cowering and ill with the airborne suffering. Jared looked at his daughter and saw her anguish. Darnell, put it down. Darnell snatched a look of his father's newly condemning glance. Here you go. He threw the spider at Josephine. Josephine watched the spider fall. Her gaze rushed to where it lay. With its few remaining legs and a body heavy with pain, it crawled across the grass to stand at the bottom of the dogwood behind the two huddled women. On all fours, Josephine crawled to it, watching the tiny, tormented creature. She put her hand beside it and cried. The spider looked up and saw 100 little girl fingers, all wanting to rub his wounds free of the pain that throbbed on his round, suffering body. Josephine imagined her hand, too, was a plucked spider, and together they cried for their lost limbs until the agony lifted under their friendship. Her little girl fingers tapped a message into the ground, a message of love, a plea for forgiveness. The message was for the spider. It was for her brother. This message seeped into the soil as sweetly as spring rain. The spider heard it with an open heart. The spider wished her well. It faded and was still. The earth, with its fondness for this little girl on its breast, waited until she left this place under the dogwood, waited for the sun to turn its eyes away before consuming her spider companion and turning him into something arising and new. So kind is the earth. Thank you for listening to The Waking Tree by C. Don McCallum. If you're enjoying this story, please consider sharing it with someone you know. And please like the video and subscribe to this channel to help others discover these stories.